Let's talk about the most important part of a soundtrack for a film or video game, and that is the themes and motifs. The motif is the smallest amount of music that you can make meaningful. It is the group or phrase of notes that when played together conveys some kind of idea, and this idea can be repeated throughout the game or film, and each time it might have different meaning depending on what the scene is, but you keep coming back to it. And when you keep expanding this motif, it can turn into a theme, which is the recognizable melody, and it's the part that the whole composition is based upon. When you think of a popular film, there might be a theme song that comes to mind, and as soon as you hear it, you know what the film was. Even though you might not be seeing the film, you just hear the sound and you recognize it. Okay, that's from that movie. So this is what a motif develops into. And the difference between them is that a motif is a small idea or a symbol that helps to explain the theme, while the theme is the central idea or message. So let's take a look at a few motifs and themes in some popular films and video games, and then you'll understand what they are.
Your destiny. Flawless victory. Fight!
One of the clips that I just played for you was the song Time from Inception by Hans Zimmer. It's at a beats per minute of around 60 and is in the key of A minor. And it's a fantastic example of how a motif is developed into a theme. And the reason why is because it's really simple. This particular song is made out of 4 chords. It has an A minor chord, an E minor chord, a G, and then a D chord. And these chords are slowly developed throughout the song as well as throughout the film. So we have, just looking at our sheet music here, we have our introduction of the chords that slowly progress. Then they add in a secondary note to the chord. In the lower section, we start to add a rhythmic pattern in the left hand, the bass clef. And then we start to add in a counter melody around this point, around the 49th bar, I suppose. And then around the 65th bar, we start to add in the ostinato, which is playing alongside, and then we gradually return back to our counter melody and then closing off with just the single notes that we were introduced to in the beginning. So it's a very short piece, actually. It's a very straightforward, simple piece, but it has a lot of emotion when you hear it. And the reason is because of how it's utilized throughout the film. It's utilized at different parts. It's utilized in the love sequences. It's utilized in the action sequences, when he's remembering things, when there's emotional stress, when there's relief. You hear this song played at many different parts. It's actually throughout the entire film. It's mostly just one song for the film with key different elements played in different scenes. So let's take a look at the notes in our sequencer. This is the song entirely played, and we can start with just looking at the introduction of the chords. So here we have the A and the C, and the E and the G and the B, and the D and the F sharp. And you can see this just repeats a few times. At least you can visually see it, especially when it's played in your sequencer. You can see these notes. It's actually the same notes throughout the entire piece. You just see they're repeating. But the difference is that he starts to add in different rhythmic patterns. In the left hand, when we get to this section, you can slowly hear it gets introduced. I'll play it here. And you can see that the rhythmic pattern gets introduced in the left hand. And this is a nice way to see it, because this is what you'll be doing when you're composing your own motif. Is you'll start with the chords, you'll start to add in a rhythmic pattern, and then you'll gradually add in the counter melody, which is what happens around this bar. So then it introduces the counter melody, and later on you'll start to see he introduces in the ostinatos later on in the section, in the higher section. Let's skip to that. And then he returns back to the counter melody again. Around here. And then he comes back to the chords again at the very end. I find that looking at the notes in your sequencer, the MIDI notes, is sometimes a good way to understand how a music was actually composed from the ground up. When you see it in the sheet music, sometimes it's hard to visualize. But in a sequencer, you can move around the notes and you can take a look. So I find if you want to analyze a musical score, if you understand how to read sheet music, that's great. But it's also useful to break it up into the sequencer as well to see how it can be recreated. Because this is usually an easier way to hear the notes. Whereas when you're just looking at a musical score, you can only see it. Unless you have a piano nearby. So let me just recap how this score was essentially composed here. We started off with our chords. We then added in some rhythmic patterns in the left side. We added in some ostinatos. We introduced different counter melodies, which are played at different parts throughout the song. And what then Hans Zimmer does is he breaks it up into different instruments, electronic instruments, brass instruments, into what he feels would be appropriate for the scene that he's listening to, that he's watching. And when you play these at different key points in the film, with different speeds, with different instruments, with different counter melody parts, you'll introduce different feelings of emotion. And you do this throughout the entire film, which he does in Inception. His song is continuously played in almost every scene of the film. You can create a really powerful theme, which is what people remember when they see the film.